Hi, my name is Lisa Whitenack, and I am an associate professor of biology and geology at Allegheny College, which is located in Meadville, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half north of Pittsburgh, not near any ocean at all. But that's okay because I am a paleobiologist, which I'll explain what that means in just a moment. So let me share my screen with you. And here we go. All right, so the paleo part should be a giveaway that I'm going to be talking to you about shark fossils today. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about the long-term kind of fossil record that we have for sharks and all of their relatives. And it's a puzzle because, as this picture indicates, this is a very old shark from the 380 million years or 400 million years, somewhere in that range. It's a jumble of teeth, so it's definitely a puzzle when we're trying to study these. Before we talk about that, though, let's talk about, there we go, how I got here. Again, I'm not anywhere near an ocean, and I didn't grow up near an ocean either. I grew up in Chicago, and when I was a kid, we'd take these trips up to northern Wisconsin, actually almost in the UP in Michigan, up in Mercer here. And we would go fishing. And so I grew up with freshwater fish and spending a lot of time in lakes in both Illinois and Wisconsin. My grandmother had a house near a lake in Illinois as well. And so when we were outside, I was off in the woods, I was fishing, I was swimming, and doing all sorts of things to get me dirty. This is me. I am back here as well with my family. And when it was raining out, what I would do is spend time with this book. It's the Reader's Digest Guide to North American Wildlife. And my grandmother had this at her house, and I have it now that she's passed. And I would pore over this book. In particular, I would spend a lot of time with the sharks. And when I open up this book now, you can tell that the shark pages are particularly well loved. Now, this is a Reader's Digest guide, which means it's condensed and doesn't nearly have every shark found in North American waters. It has some of the pretty predictable ones like this white shark that you can see here. And this hammerhead, but also some smaller and more unusual sharks like the angel shark here. So I learned a lot about these pretty common sharks in the US, including white sharks and lemon sharks. This is a dogfish, and here's a nurse shark. And I thought this was pretty much it for sharks, because this was my exposure was through these books and whatever I could read at the library. For undergrad, I went to the University of Illinois and actually avoided biology completely. I took a history of life course to fulfill my biology requirement because I didn't have a very good experience with biology in high school. And I fell in love with geology. I had always been a dinosaur nerd, but I didn't know I could do that as a career. My mom's a teacher. My dad was an IT guy for computers and stuff. There are no scientists in my family. So this was something that I didn't get exposed to until I was an undergrad. And my undergrad advisor was a starfish paleontologist in geology. And he said, hey, I know you like things with backbones better. So why don't we go and look at all these teeth that were found with this fossil starfish that I was going to have you describe for your thesis. So that took us, so here's Champaign, Illinois, and that took us to Missouri, where these fossils were from, and I kind of didn't look back. Included with these, the starfish that I wasn't particularly interested in were a ton of different shark teeth, and the thing that got me, this is one of the shark teeth from my senior thesis work as an undergrad. It looks nothing like those modern shark teeth that you would see in that white shark or that nurse shark or that lemon shark. This cusp is conical, it's tall, this base is huge. Here's a centimeters and millimeters scale for you. It's got all these little cusplets. We don't see these in living sharks now. And this captured my imagination. And this particular tooth has driven most of my scientific research in the shark world, because I want to know why this is the way it is. Why is it shaped this way? And why don't we have this anymore? Why don't sharks have this shape anymore? Well, in the meantime, after I graduated from Illinois, I ended up at Michigan State for my master's, working with Mike Gottfried and Danita Brandt, pictured here, and looking at fossil mako teeth that were much younger than that 350 million year old shark tooth that I just showed you. And then from there, I went down to Tampa, Florida, to do my PhD with Phil Moda. And that tooth was still bugging me. And Phil works on shark feeding biomechanics with living sharks. And it turns out he had been thinking about teeth for a while too. And that tooth never got out of my head. And so I asked him if he'd be willing to take a geologist into a biology PhD program to figure out why shark teeth are shaped the way they are. Because the idea that I had was if I can understand them in living sharks, maybe I could take that, ball it up and toss it into the fossil record to figure out what was going on with my 300 and some million year old shark tooth that I showed you. And so that was my first time that I actually got to play with a living shark. And by play, I mean do research. This is our lab trying unsuccessfully to measure bite force in a bull shark at Mountain Marine Lab, but I also got to work with live nurse sharks and help my fellow lab mates with other really great shark research. I got to go diving with sharks for my first time ever while I was in Phil's lab. And the other thing, switching from geology to biology really opened up my eyes into all the weird and wonderful things that modern sharks do. I thought that sharks were like white sharks and dogfish, and that they were all kind of roughly in this one size range, and they were all doing one thing to eat. They were biting, and that is absolutely not true. We have filter feeders like this whale shark and this manta ray that are swimming along and filtering out all the small things that they want to eat. We have amazing suction feeders like this nurse shark, which is attempting to feed on something under there. I got to participate in a project where we measured how much suction pressure these sharks generate, and it's a negative atmosphere. They're forming a literal vacuum, which is so cool. I had no idea about suction feeding. Sharks are really huge, like our whale sharks, but sharks are also really tiny, like this little lantern shark type thing. So my Reader's Digest book didn't encompass this, and this is stuff that I learned during my PhD. I also learned about all these wonderful weirdos, and again, I had no idea until I got to graduate school just how diverse sharks were. Things like the goblin shark, which can throw their jaws out pretty far, saw sharks and sawfish, guitarfish, lantern sharks, hammerheads, cow-nose rays, which I have a particular love for. Things that crunch things like this heterodontus, this horn shark. My favorite shark of all time is this deep water shark called frilled shark. I love it because it looks like a Muppet, and I love their teeth, which I'll show you in a minute. And then even things that aren't sharks like chimeras and ratfish. So my PhD really exposed me to the diversity of these animals and trying to figure out what's going on with their teeth. So historically, when we study teeth, because this is what the fossil record is, and I'll show you more about that in a little bit, we tend to sort things, right? Humans like to categorize things and sort things, and we do the same with teeth. So often what's been done when we study shark teeth is we like to sort them by shape. And then what we do is say, okay, well, these particular shapes are good at particular things. So for example, these kind of small and multicuspid teeth in this yellow box here are often called clutching teeth, or for grasping. Teeth like this more molar-like tooth, which is from a horn shark, are really good at crushing and grinding hard things. Right? Pointy teeth that don't have serrations on them are said to be good at tearing or puncturing. And then the more triangular serrated teeth that look more like a steak knife are better at cutting, is how this has gone in the past. Then we usually take that next step, like I already kind of did, and try and link that to ecology. So we now call these ecomorphs because it's linking shape, that's the morph part, to the ecology of the shark. So I mentioned our crunching and grinding teeth here are typically, hard prey eaters, things that like sea urchins and clams and crabs. And then we tend to find these in coastal and benthic regions. So coastal near the coast, benthic, deep water. And then our cutting teeth tend to eat soft and medium-bodied prey. this is all well and good, except that a lot of the more recent research has found that this doesn't work so well. These boxes really don't hold except in very limited cases. So our crushing and grinding stuff really is best at the hard prey, but especially our cutting and tearing stuff, they're equally good at crushing and or cutting and poking things basically. And then I said I'd point out what frilled shark teeth. This is a frilled shark tooth. It's trident. This is one of the reasons I love these sharks. They have such weird teeth. All right, so we don't know what's going on here. It's the short story, and this is one of my research areas. Now, when we start looking at the fossil record, right, that diversity of teeth that you saw in our previous slide gets even larger. So I love this artwork from Rachel, and I'm going to pull a Charles Darwin quote here, endless forms most beautiful, because I think that describes the shark fossil record really well. These are all different fossil sharks, some of which we have bodies for, some of which we don't. Here's our resident human. This is the megalodon, in case you were wondering, but look at all these wacky forms, right? This is not a shark. This is something more closely related to our chimeras and ratfish and ghost sharks. And then there's this, we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's a lot of really neat stuff here that we don't see now that really captures the imagination. So what do these fossils actually look like? I'm going to show you some really wonderful examples. We're going to start back at the beginning of our shark fossil record in the Devonian. This is way before the dinosaurs. So dinosaurs come on the scene about 250 million years. So we're way before that. This is also, I should mention, before insects and before trees. Sharks are really, really old. And the Cleveland Shale is a deposit that's about 2 hours away from me, which is very convenient for me. I landed in a good spot for early sharks. And you see these beautiful body fossils. Here's Cladocellaceae flyeri. Not only do we have pectoral fins here, here's the tail, the head's up here. We have jaws in some cases. And we have stomach contents in a couple of these where we actually know what these sharks are eating. That's extraordinarily rare. The Cleveland Shale is probably best known for not shark fossils though, but for this placoderm, which is called Dunkleosteus, and this head is about 3 foot tall. You've probably, if you've gone to a natural history museum and looked at fossils, you've probably seen this. Not a shark, but what this particular deposit is best known for. We move up in time a little bit closer. We have some extraordinary fossils from the Bear Gulch. Bear Gulch is in Montana. Mississippian is the time period, which is about 323 million years ago. This is the time period I studied for my undergrad, and that's been driving a lot of my research. But my stuff was from Missouri, not from Montana. Again, I am very lucky that I landed at Allegheny College because these fossils from Montana are at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, which is only an hour and a half away. So I'm in good reach of all these Paleozoic fossils, which is great. Lots of cool stuff. I mean, this is clearly recognizable as a shark, right? Here's the snout, here's the jaws, here's the, I guess, the chin for lack of a better term. And the rest of the skull moving back. And this is Damocles, named for this shoulder spine that has hanging over its head. You can see it's got these little tiny tooth-like denticles on there too. And look how small, this is centimeters and millimeters, right? These are little itty bitty sharks. The Bear Gulch is well known for their really nicely preserved shark fossils, and especially what we call euchondrocephalins. So that is a group that includes our modern ratfish, ghost sharks, and other holocephalins. We have this weirdo that looks kind of like a tadpole. It's not, it's a little holocephalin. And then this one I love because it's called Balancea. This is the whole slab. Here's again that same little ruler I was using. So this is a very large slab of rock, and you can see it's got the whole body. And for me being someone who studies teeth, if you zoom in on the snout, you can see the teeth and they're interlocking. So cool, so cool. We're going to go up to dinosaur time, right into the Jurassic. We also have some beautiful whole body fossils from the Solnhofen limestone in Germany. Solnhofen is more famous for Archaeopteryx, that transitional bird dinosaur fossil, but look how gorgeous these are. Not only you have fin rays preserved, this one, look how 3D it is. The jaws are standing out from the rest of the body. Amazing. But you may have noticed I have exceptional fossils written on all of these, and that's because they are the exception. It turns out they're extraordinarily rare, and that's because sharks and their relatives are made out of cartilage. So if you touch the bridge of your nose, that's pretty similar to the stuff that makes up most of the shark skeleton. When you're burying a dead organism and subjecting it to millions of years of tectonic forces from squishing and plate movement and heat and pressure, cartilage doesn't hold up very well. But what does hold up very well is teeth. Your teeth are very, very hard, right? They're made out of enamel and dentin. So are shark teeth. It's a slightly different enamel and dentin, but our teeth are pretty similar to shark teeth. And they're very durable and very hard. So when I go to museums, and I'm a museum person more than a field person, and I go into museum collections to study shark fossils, what I see is what you have on the screen here. Drawer upon drawer upon drawer of shark teeth, not the rest of the body. And shark teeth are actually the most common vertebrate fossil by a long shot. So this is what my research typically looks like, is a drawer full of stuff, right? The reason we have that, in addition to teeth being super durable, is that sharks produce thousands of teeth in their lifetime. They are continuously replacing their teeth, probably because of wear more than breakage. I'm working on figuring that out. But sharks, this is a U inside the shark mouth and the gums removed. So you can see all of these replacement teeth down here waiting to slide in and rotate into a functional position for shark bites. So when you have a single shark making thousands of these, and this is a very durable and hard part of the body, it's no wonder that shark's teeth are the most common vertebrate fossils, vertebrates being things with backbones. All right, excuse me. So where are we? What are we doing with these? Excuse me. I am a paleobiologist, as I mentioned, and what this means is that I use a combination of biology and geology in terms of my research. So I use techniques from both, and I have degrees in both, so this hopefully makes sense. My master's and bachelor's are in geology, my PhD is in biology. And so the tools I can use from each discipline really tell me a lot about what these sharks were doing for a living. So I'm interested in what sharks were doing back before our modern sharks, over their whole 400 million years. And I want to know how they were living and how they were using those teeth. So I can use information from ecology and evolution and biology, but also pull in information from the rocks these sharks' teeth and stuff are buried in and preserved in, such as depositional environment, what other fossils are with it to help me reconstruct what they may have been eating. But paleobiology doesn't just stop with these two. There's an incredibly interdisciplinary field that borrows from pretty much just every other science there is. And so for me, the only thing I don't do is the chemistry. And I have wonderful colleagues that do stable isotope chemistry, like Sora Kim, to do that work. But I do physics, I do engineering, I do some computer science stuff, I run a lot of statistics. So I pull from almost this entire diagram here to figure out why sharks' teeth are shaped the way they are over that 400 million years of evolution. So to give you an example of some of the stuff I can do, I'm going to pull from the physics and engineering part of it first. Since teeth are what I have in the fossil record, that's where most of my work is. And I do usually the biomechanics stuff, so the physics and engineering of how these teeth work. So for example, this is something that I did during my PhD, and I did do this with replicas of the fossil teeth. No fossils were harmed in this research. And I wanted to know how teeth work. So one of the ways I could measure that is with force. How much force does it take for a tooth to enter a particular prey item? The idea being that maybe there are some teeth that can't enter certain prey items, so that would tell me something about how those teeth are being used. Maybe there are certain prey items that the teeth work better on, and force can help me figure that out too. And so this was my apparatus on the left. There is a short fin mako tooth here, so that's a living shark. And I have it cemented into this PVC coupler with dental cement. I practice what I call Home Depot science a lot of the time, where I'm building things out of stuff that wasn't meant to be used for scientific research, but you know, it works. PVC is my favorite thing. It's like adult Tinker Toys. It's great. But anyway, here's my tooth. And this is hooked up to a giant hydraulic press that is very fancy and very expensive and not mine. This will move the tooth into my prey item. This is a white grunt that's sitting here. And what you're not seeing is a big computer on the other side that controls the speed and also tells me how much force this fish is going to undergo throughout this entire process. So my fish is sitting here in a wooden cradle because we found out very quickly that if I could just put the fish on this metal plate, it goes flying across the room, and turns out scientists don't like that own the lab. So we made this cradle for it. And then underneath this kind of drape to protect the equipment is a force transducer, and that's what hooks into the computer. That force transducer acts like a bathroom scale, where as this tooth presses down on this fish, the fish presses down on the cradle presses down on the plate presses down on the force transducer. So all that force is transferred down, and we can, you know, measure with, well, whatever force this says is the force that the fish is undergoing. And we don't start it with the tooth this high. We started with the tooth touching the fish because this is just for illustration purposes. And what we get out of it after a while is this. I also filmed this with high-speed cameras so I could see what was actually happening. And here we have force in newtons on the Y and how far that tooth has gone, how much it's moved out of its total amount of movement on the X. So the take-home message here is, here we're getting started. As that tooth is compressing that fish before it enters, that force is taking more and more forces. We're pressing harder and harder down until finally it breaks through the fish. That's where you see this kind of release and drop in pressure. So we can test how the teeth work. And I did this with the fossil teeth too by making cast aluminum copies, sharpening them a bit, and doing this with a bunch of different prey items. We can also borrow some medical equipment and some engineering software to figure out how strong these teeth are. So, and then here, this is another fossil weirdo tooth that called Xenocanthus. Here's my original tooth from my undergrad that's been bugging me. And here what I've done is something called finite element analysis, which engineers use all the time to figure out if your tires on your car are going to be stable when they design new tires. Is that bridge going to stay up? Where's the bridge going to break? That kind of stuff. Lots of things we use that engineers design go through this process. And it's neat because all you need to do is give the computer the shape, give the computer information about what that is made out of, how hard is the material, how elastic is the material, and then tell the computer where the force is going to be and which direction it's going in. And the computer will map out in the program stress and strain to figure out what's going on. So when we look at these teeth, then cool colors are areas of low stress, hot colors or warm colors are areas of high stress. And so where we see these teeth lighting up in red and orange are weak points. The good news is, in some ways, right, is that these teeth, what this tells me is everything has a weak point. No matter, you know, at some point you're going to give it enough force that it's going to break. But a well-designed object will have these stress patterns that are very distinct. And that's what we saw in the shark teeth. They matched well-designed man-made objects that aren't necessarily going to break. The stress is going to places where the tooth can handle it. And so we can look at this and say, all right, well, you know, these weird shapes that we have, it's not because they can't function. The previous slide, right? That research that I showed you, those old shark teeth work great, just like modern shark teeth do, even though they look very different. This particular research showed me that, okay, the old shark teeth are just as strong as the modern shark teeth, so that's not why they're shaped the way they are, right? So there's lots of things we can do with the teeth to figure that out. This one is not my research, but is really cool, so I'm going to tell you about it. This is from a shark called Helicoprion. Not a true shark. It's more closely related to the ratfish and the ghost sharks. And look at this. This is a tooth whorl. This one did not shed their teeth. They held onto it. And this is what the fossils look like. We don't have any other part of the body but these tooth whorls. And you can find these in the US as well. Here's another ray troll image showing all the ways that people have tried to figure out what Helicophyte looked like and where this tooth whorl ended up. So if we take, there were some hypotheses that it could be whipped out like one of those party favors where you blow through it and it unfurls. Some people, back in the day put it on top of fins, put it on tails. More recently, we know it's somewhere in the jaw, but no one can really agree on how. We don't know how this goes, which makes it a really interesting and difficult thing to study. But some friends and colleagues of mine did some really neat, similar kind of engineering analysis to what I've been showing you with the same idea of studying how it worked. And they tried to reconstruct the head based on what we know about modern sharks and their relatives and how we think this may sit. They reconstructed what they think the muscles will look like. And from that, if we know the muscles and we know the kind of architecture of how those sit in the skull, we can figure out how hard maybe these organisms bit. So here's bite force at different points along that tooth whorl. And you can see that it gets pretty high, up to 4,500 newtons, which puts it in line with modern white sharks and bull sharks, which are a bit lower, but still right in that range. So we can do really cool stuff with these fossil teeth, even though that's the only part of the organism. That's the take-home message here. So my heart lies in the Paleozoic and with our modern sharks, even though they're separated by a very long period. The Paleozoic sharks were around from 400 to 250 million years. And when we compare them to the modern sharks on the left, and here's a bunch of Paleozoic teeth on the right, they look nothing alike, with very, very few exceptions. We have this tooth that looks kind of similar to something like this, but it's bigger. So maybe something more along the lines of this bull shark tooth. And here's my tooth again, the one that drives my research. We don't see these, right? So I've been trying for a long time, for most of my research career, to figure out what is going on with these Paleozoic shark teeth. Why don't we see them anymore? How did they function? And so forth. And so that's how I'm going to spend the last part of my talk here, is talking about this line of research that I've been doing. And so the goals of this research are threefold. First is to actually quantify tooth shape, right? So we know that some sharks have very distinctive shapes, some have very common shapes. I wanted to find a way to try and quantify all that so that I could also compare that to the diversity of tooth shapes in the Paleozoic. Do we have more shapes now than we did before? Even though we tend to think of those triangular teeth, right, with white sharks and bull sharks, like this bull shark I have here, there's a huge variety of them, right, which we saw if I just back up my slide, right? That's a huge variety of shapes. So let's try and actually quantify that and measure that. Then I wanted to take the modern sharks and use that tooth shape to try and correlate it with what they're eating and other ecological measurements. Where are they living? Are they close to shore? Are they living in deep water? What's going on there? And then if I can take all that and so that's what that middle one is, take all that and throw it back into the fossil record. Hopefully I can get some insights into the Paleozoic shark teeth, not necessarily to answer those exact questions, but to guide me with where to look next. So this is very exploratory and not hypothesis driven, right? When you hear about the kind of scientific method, right? Develop a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis and so forth. Not all research does that. Some of it's very exploratory to try and figure out what those hypotheses could be. So this is kind of like the steps before that. All right, so how did I do this? This is an evolutionary tree of all of the shark species that I studied for the modern sharks. So 39 different species, 24 of the 33 non-filter feeding families, and across all 8 orders of sharks. So I didn't sample every single shark species. That's pretty much impossible, right? But I have a pretty decent sample size across the diversity of modern sharks. And then what I did was visited a lot of museum collections. Again, I'm a museum gal, and sat with a lot of shark jaws and preserved sharks and took photos and measured teeth. And so the things, this is a bull shark jaw. The center of the jaw is right here off the screen. So this is tooth position 1 and so forth. And it increases as you go to the corner. I measured things like percent overlap. Sometimes shark teeth have overlap where they're tied together with collagen. Sometimes there's big spaces between the teeth. It depends on the species. So I wanted to measure that. And then I measured a bunch of other stuff like height and width, the lengths of these cutting edges, the angle that this notch makes. And then I could use these measurements to do ratios. So a ratio of height to width is called aspect ratio. That tells me about how, is it a tall tooth or is it a wide tooth? Relatively speaking, how triangular is it? If I take the ratio of this kind of longer non-notch side to this notch side, and I take that ratio, it tells me how canted or how angled that tooth is because these teeth tend to point away from the center of the jaw if they're angled. Not all teeth are. I also did things like, are there serrations present? Are there teeth that look like molars, like our back teeth present? Because that tends to indicate eating hard things. Are there these little lateral cusplets on the side like we saw in that Paleozoic teeth? Because some teeth like sand tigers and nurse sharks do have single sets of those. And then also this thing called lingual labial curvature. Is a tooth curved into the mouth like this? Or is it recurved like a snake fang? Or is it just straight up and down? So I took measurements and some yes, no categorization kind of variables. And then to figure out the diet question, it was a lot of reading and looking up what these sharks eat. And so I tended to, oops, sorry, let me back that up. I tended to categorize that both by what is it? Is it a fish? Is it a squid? Is it another shark? Is it a clam? Is it, you know, something like that that reflects the mechanical challenges that these sharks are encountering as they try and eat these things. And then ran a bunch of fancy stats that are not important for right now, but the point is these stats would help me try and correlate diet and tooth morphology together. All right, so what does it look like when I'm looking at this data? Don't panic. I'm going to walk you through this. What is important for this is just looking at the dots, the axes, so the lines don't matter at all. So the first thing I did was color code it by what order, what group of sharks are we talking about, things that are related to each other, right? And this looks like a splatter of rainbow glitter, and that tells me that there is absolutely no pattern in tooth shape based on who you are and who you're related to. If I saw that, I'd see a clump of red, a clump of yellow, and a clump of blue, and I don't see that at all. So that's interesting. And then, again, don't panic. What this does is once I have my teeth on here, I can look at trends in certain things that I measured. And so this is how that maps out for my science friends. The big picture here. Large teeth tend to group together over here. Smaller teeth tend to group together on this side of the graph. Okay, that makes sense. Teeth that are overlapped, like I showed you on that bull shark jaw, tend to be down here. So these are small and overlapped, for example. Teeth that are spaced out tend to be over here. Okay, and then I know I keep adding things to this. Things that are straight up and down tend to be on the left side of the graph. Things that are more tilted towards the corners of the jaw tend to be on the right. We also see our serrated teeth tend to group together down here. Now, what this is doing basically is helping me understand the lay of the land in terms of what shapes and what patterns am I seeing. So all my teeth that are kind of in this bottom right quadrant tend to be serrated and big and slightly angled. The stuff that is in this upper left quadrant tends to be small and straight up and down. So that means when I map diet on top of this, I can start correlating things. So let's do that. So now everything, and I kept where my molariform teeth and all my kind of general patterns are here. In red, I have the things that we're eating. So what does this mean? It means that things that are hard mollusks like clams, echinoderms, these are usually sea urchins, which are very hard. Crabs, these tend to fall where we have teeth that are overlapped and kind of more molar-like. Okay, that makes sense. That's something we would expect based on those initial slides that I showed you. Over here, teeth that are big and serrated, those sharks are tending to also eat things like marine mammals like dolphins, birds, other fishes, and so forth. So there are some patterns like that, but a lot of the patterns here don't make a lot of sense. For example, why are teeth that are spaced apart and kind of tilted or angled to one side, why do they tend to eat squid? No idea. None of that makes sense. So we have some stuff that doesn't make sense, and we have some stuff that kind of makes sense, but there's also exception to these. If I go through and I look at each individual tooth that don't match up with it, where we have these teeth that are, serrated, great, but I know some of these aren't eating these particular things. Six gills aren't eating turtles, for example. So it's kind of a mess. And what that means, that tells us something though. We don't just go, ugh, this was useless. No, the fact that this is a mess means there isn't a lot of relationship between the type of tooth you have and what you're eating. Even though we see some things, if you're big and you're going to eat, big teeth and eating big prey, that makes sense. Hard prey and malariform stuff, that makes sense, but there's literally no other correlations other than that. So we don't see that tooth shape mapping to what you eat, except in very rare instances, and that's interesting. All right, so why? Well, it turns out there's a couple different reasons for that, I think. The first is that, sharks do weird things with their teeth that we can't predict. So for example, here's a cookie cutter shark on the right. They are technically, I'd say, parasites, right? Where they will swim up to something large, grab hold of the side, rotate their bodies like you're making a biscuit or a cookie cutter like you would with with one of those cutters, which thus the name, and pull up chunks of prey and off they go, right? We would never predict that from tooth shape. Tiger sharks are another group of weirdos. They eat so many different things that it makes it hard to correlate their tooth shape with one thing, right? Because they have a huge varied diet, including things like seabirds in this picture. And I believe recently there was also a tiger shark that had eaten a songbird. And then this is a loggerhead turtle that a tiger shark had gotten to, that someone sent a picture of to me. So we can't predict how they're using their teeth pretty reliably, and they're using them in interesting ways that we wouldn't have thought of. Also, sharks don't just use their teeth for eating, they also use them for mating. So here we see some sharks, nurse sharks and whatnot, and some white tip reef sharks. The males grab onto the female with their teeth to hold them in place for mating, and then this is why we see mating scars on a lot of females. So their teeth, and I'll say too, in stingrays, in Atlantic stingrays, the males will actually, their teeth change shape as you get close to mating season to help facilitate that grabbing. So the teeth have multiple purposes, right? So a lot of that means that, if you're using a tool for multiple things, it needs to be able to handle all those things, and may not have a good one-to-one mapping of shape and this one function, because there isn't one function, there's a lot of them. Okay, so let's talk about the fossils. So I measured the same stuff, and I used a combination of museum collections and this Handbook of Paleoichthyology, which is a wonderful resource that has images of tons and tons of fossil sharks, so that if there's fossil sharks that I could only get in Europe and I can't get to Europe, like now during pandemic, right? I can go to this book, and they usually have scale bars, which means I can still measure. I added some additional tooth variables to try and think about what kind of teeth we had with the Paleozoic and comparing them to these very different moderns. So things like looking at the sharpness of the cusp, because a lot of these are blunt. And then there are some tooth type designations that are in that book that I could use too. And then I also wanted to know, when did these sharks first come on the scene? How old are they? And then more stats is all that means. So we're going to have more graphs. Okay. This is a different type of stat, but the graphs, again, the axes don't necessarily matter. In this case, what I've done is I've coded all of my really old sharks, the Paleozoic sharks. So this is the 400 to 250 million year zone, right? Pre-dinosaurs. They're in this kind of blue color. And then my living sharks, or my extant sharks, are in green. And every dot is a different species of shark. And so this is basically this kind of outline that I did has all of the Paleozoic sharks in this kind of zone, right? So you won't see any blue outside of this line. So this is their kind of area of shape, and same with the green for our moderns. So a couple different things here. The first is we have this zone of overlap, which is really interesting because we didn't see a lot of similarities just kind of glancing at the Paleozoic and the modern sharks. When I code everyone by their kind of affinity or relatedness for each other, this is going to help me later, I haven't gotten to it yet, figure out which sharks should I be comparing, right? With these blue ones, which modern sharks in green fall in that same kind of zone of shape and have similar shapes so that I can start doing more direct comparisons. And when I do that, I see dogfish in the swallow-forms, I see reef sharks in the carchariniforms, and the rectolobiforms are things like zebra sharks and nurse sharks and even our whale sharks. So although I didn't include whale sharks here, but now this gives me some direction for figuring out those particular sharks that are in here. But the other cool part of this also is all of these non-overlapped areas. This is all tooth shapes we don't see in the modern ones. Here are all tooth shapes that we don't see in the Paleozoic. So there's a lot more weird stuff that we don't see now that I don't have a direct comparison for. And this is telling me something about what to do next. Now I've the same exact data and I'm recolor coding it based on when these sharks lived. So the green is still my living sharks. And now I've got 4 different geologic periods. The Devonian is our oldest, Mississippian, that's my favorite one from my undergrad research, Pennsylvanian and Permian. At the end of the Permian is the biggest mass extinction of all time, where 95% of organisms go extinct and is right before the dinosaurs show up, okay? So just to orient you in time. So when I start dividing this up, this is where I get excited. So my oldest 2 time periods, the Devonian and the Mississippian, we see the same general types of teeth in those 2 periods, given that they're occupying the same part of this graph. And these kind of weird shapes that I've made are roughly the same size, which tells me they have the same general amount of diversity. So the story doesn't change much as you move from 400 and some million years to 350 or 320 something million years. But this is where I get excited. We get to the Pennsylvanian and we shift over. We lose some of our shapes. We have even less overlap with the modern ones. And this area that this pink line bounds is smaller. So we've actually decreased the amount of diversity we see as we move closer to that big mass extinction. And when we get to the Permian, it's even smaller. So something is happening here. Now, I don't know what it is yet. And this is, again, the part of my research that makes me really excited is people don't look hard at sharks because they are so long lived. They're like, they sailed through the mass extinctions, no problem. But something's going on here where we're seeing this shrinking diversity in the sharks ahead of that big mass extinction. And I don't know why. Is it because their prey is changing? Is it because environmental conditions are changing? No idea. So when I talked about exploratory research and trying to figure out hypotheses or generate hypotheses, this is what I'm talking about, is actually sitting down and going, no one's noticed that before. I wonder why that is. And now that's going to drive future research in my lab, which is awesome. And I can't wait. So where do I go next with this? Well, ideally, I'd have some sort of time machine so that I can go back in time and actually see what these sharks are eating and see what they're doing. My colleague in physics that I work with assures me you can only go forward in time and not backwards. So apparently this is a non-starter. Alternatively, I'd like some sort of Paleozoic park where I can do this and have them alive. Again, also I've been informed this is not going to happen. So realistically, what can I do as much as I want to time travel? There's a lot of work to do, and my students who are amazing. I worked with these incredible undergraduates over the years, and what we're working on together is trying to figure out what both modern sharks' teeth are capable of and the fossil ones. So the work that I presented at the beginning about how these teeth work with the performance testing in the computers, only 3 fossil teeth have been done, and those are the 3 I did. In addition, there hasn't been a lot of testing on the modern shark teeth yet. We have the work I did with 12 species. A couple other folks have picked up and done some more, but we have a long way to go, right? There's hundreds of shark species with really bizarre teeth that we haven't even touched. And so we have a lot of work to do just figuring out what could they actually do, let alone in the fossil record. And a lot of work has been done on single teeth and how they work. And so the work I did was just one tooth puncturing, right? But when you look at a shark jaw, and just like our jaws, we have teeth all the way across, and the teeth in the upper and lower jaws interact. So how these teeth work together is really important. Catherine Korn and Adam Summers have done amazing work. I don't have this video queued up, but go on YouTube and search shark and saw, and Catherine Korn's name. So Korn, pretty easy to remember. They literally glued teeth to a saw blade and cut stuff and measured force. Brilliant, brilliant work. And then I have a student working on the upper lower problem that we're actually pretty close to submitting that for publication, which is very exciting. So there's a lot to do here. There's also this time component, right? This is geologic time. So we are here. Here is where sharks came on the scene, a little bit before the Devonian, which is where I've been looking at. We have some gut content stuff, and here, these are just different shapes and showing you when they've been around, right? We know some gut contents, but because we mostly have teeth and not guts, we don't know. And so we know that, if we look at bony fishes, there's been a ton of work on their evolution, and we know that now, instead of showing when they're around, these lines represent the thickness of their armor. Fishes started off super, super duper armored. And as we go through time, their armor becomes lighter and thinner so that they can get faster and faster. That's really well documented. And so there's probably something going on with the teeth that you're using to bust through these changing and the fish changing. And we know from some of my previous research and others' research that even if we're comparing modern bony fishes, there's variation in terms of how those scales protect these fishes and how the sharks get into them and how much force they need. But there's a whole lot of other stuff out there that sharks eat and did eat that is not well studied in terms of what kind of changes do we see in their armor and their durability, and then trying to link that to what the predators are doing. Because we know predators and prey co-evolve, right? There's lots and lots of literature on there, but no one has gone through and looked at this for the invertebrates in particular and tried to link it to shark teeth. So there's lots of work to do there. In addition, so that's the how do these teeth function, figure out the food situation, which is just what I kind of talked about. We need to really expand what we're looking at. I've looked at the sharky sharks, right? This does not count the flat sharks or the batoids, so things like skates and rays. And I've had students trying to figure out how to measure those teeth, and it is hard to have a common measuring scheme for that. We can't seem to link it up with a common measuring scheme with the sharks either. So this is an area ripe with research to do the same kind of thing. Same with the euchondrocephalans. Those are, again, our holocephalans, our ratfish, our ghost sharks, and so forth. And some of the weirdos that I showed you from the Bear Gulch, right? Nobody's done that yet. And we're missing the middle. I've measured Paleozoic, I've measured the recent, but I'm missing dinosaur times and the stuff immediately after the dinosaurs. And so I've had students chipping away at that for the last couple of years. But to get the big picture of this very long-lived group of organisms, we really need to get the whole picture, right? We need to include everybody and so forth. There's also really cool stuff that you can do with some of these fossils that nobody has attempted. And I would love, love, love someone to do this. So swimming mechanics. We do have these whole body fossils. I showed you Falcatus from the Bear Gulch. It has that weird shoulder spine hanging over its head, right? This one. This is Stethecanthus. What is this, right? Looks like, it's called a spine brush complex. It looks like a scrubby brush for your floors turned upside down. Why do you need this? Not only why do you need this, you have this thing sticking off your head that's probably not very hydrodynamic. How did this affect swimming mechanics and swimming efficiency? So I have lots of ideas for how to do this that I love for someone to jump on. I mean, we could 3D print these and strap it to a dogfish, just saying. Or we could build totally robotic versions. And we do have vertebrae too, and vertebrae tell us a lot about how sharks swim. So for the sharks where we have vertebrae, it'd be great to take some of these measurements and figure out what's going on there. So there's lots to do, and I hope someone listening runs with this and wants to work on it, because it is way more than one lab can do. And please go forth and tell me why these things are happening. And I think that's all I've got. So thank you to the folks organizing the last 1 week for inviting me. I love talking about fossil sharks and shark teeth, if it wasn't evident from the way I was speaking about this work. For the tooth work, Phil Moda, my PhD advisor, is a longtime collaborator, and my friend Matt Coleman. We've been working on this for a very long time and really need to get it out the door one of these days, when there isn't a global pandemic and things like that. And I've had so many wonderful students that I've worked with over the years that this work is impossible without. I wouldn't be doing anything if it weren't for my wonderful collaborators. And so thank you for your time, and I hope that you ask me questions. I'm easy to Google and find online, so please feel free to send any questions you like.